Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles, and comment on the ones I find interesting. In this episode, the week ending the 24th of December 1922, I have further thoughts on reparations, a Polish president is shot, there's more from the Fitzroy case, and some very odd things are happening on Christmas Day. Not in this episode, due to either time, ignorance or sloth, arsenic was found in Rowntree cocoa, a man has been arrested for selling obscene books. They're actually birth control books, not what you think at all. Viennese students have been demonstrating against Jewish students. The Leipzig war crime trials have found almost no one guilty. And a certain John Monnet has resigned from the League of Nations. Not in this episode, or even the Times from what I can work out, Bavarian Fascisti, I think you can guess who they are, have commandeered trains to transport their supporters to a rally in Munich. But I'm going to begin with a follow-up on last week's reparations special. Last week I confidently opined, on the basis of the 1921 demand, that Germany was able to pay, I seem to remember that number was £30 billion. Today's pounds, that is. But was the 1921 demand the same as subsequent demands? The Times doesn't say, but if we feed the principal, that's £11,300 million, the term, 42 years, and an interest rate of 3%, the contemporary Bank of England rate, we get, according to some online calculations, we get the Germans owing £39.46 million a month, which, according to my calculations, is equivalent to £473.52 million a year, or 105 million ounces of gold a year, or, in today's money, £157 billion a year. This is a large sum, but it is less than what the UK currently spends on the NHS every year. But the real question is, what are the revenues or likely revenues of the German government? To this I have no answer. Another thing that struck me was the contrast between June 1919 and December 1922. In June 1919, the Germans, having been excluded from the negotiations, their representative was summoned to Versailles and essentially told, sign here. He felt that he had no option but to sign. But now, 3 years later, the German government feels that it can resist. Why? Why the change? Could it be because the blockade was still in force in 1919? But if that is the case, why aren't the Allies threatening to reintroduce it? Or is it because the Germans see splits between the Allies that they can exploit? Or is it because the Germans have regained their fighting spirit? Or is it a combination of all three? Or is it something else? I don't know. I don't know, but I find that change interesting and probably very, very significant. And so now to what the papers actually said. This is from Monday the 18th of December. Mr. Narutowicz, I apologise if I've got that wrong, but best I can do. Anyway, Mr. Narutowicz, who was elected first president of Poland only last Saturday, was assassinated shortly after noon today. At his first public appearance at the opening of the winter exhibition of pictures at the National Art Gallery, he was fired at 3 times in rapid succession by a man named Elgius Niewiadowski. While there is no proof of a direct plot instigated by the parties of the right, their propaganda and open hostility to Mr. Narutowicz have laid them open to a very serious charge. This is what the Times editorial had to say, also from Monday the 18th. The assassination of the newly elected President of Poland, Mr. Narutowicz, is a strange and deplorable event that clouds the hope of a speedy settlement of the internal difficulties of that country. It then goes on to talk about the Constitution and says this. The Constitution further provided for the election of a president. Marshal Pilsudski, who has been head of the Polish state since the armistice, was the obvious candidate for the post. But the idea of curbing his vigorous personality within constitutional limits did not appeal to him, and he refused to stand. Regular viewers will be familiar with the Sir Amalric Fitzroy case. This is the man who was accused, convicted and unconvicted for the crime of interfering with and annoying persons using Hyde Park. Now it is his principal accuser who is in the dock. This is from Wednesday the 20th. Daisy Victoria May Broadbridge, aged 24, and described as being of no fixed abode or occupation, again appeared at Marlborough Street Police Court yesterday morning, charged with having committed perjury on October the 7th and 14th last. On October the 7th she gave the name of Dorothy Turner, widow, aged 24, of Brook Street, Kennington. She added that her husband had been killed in 1918 while serving in the Navy, and that she was receiving a pension of 15 shillings, that her husband had been a warrant officer, that she had received a 15-shilling income left her by her mother, that she was out of employment through ill health, and was last employed as a waitress at Brighton. Her statements were untrue, added Mr. Wallace, he was the prosecutor. As a matter of fact, she was a daughter of a Mrs. Broadbridge who lived near Chichester, and was the wife of a carter earning 35 shillings a week. She was never married to a man called Charles Turner at Brighton, or as far as the prosecution could find anywhere else. There was no warrant officer of the name of Charles Turner killed in the war in 1918, and no widow of such a warrant officer has been drawing any pension from the Admiralty or the Ministry of Pensions. She was not employed at the Brighton Hotel which she mentioned. A little reminder. This woman was approached by the police and essentially asked if Fitzroy was annoying her. She could have said no, and that would have been that. It gets worse. The prosecutor said that before her cross-examination, the woman was warned by the police inspector, who told her that if there was anything in her statement that was not true, she had better tell him at once. Not such a festive season for her. Talking of which, this is from Saturday the 23rd. Fixtures. Christmas Day. What? Association rules. Well, that's football, as we'd call it. League Championship. Okay, well that's the equivalent to the Premier League these days. Tottenham Hotspur versus Chelsea. 2:15 kickoff. I wonder why it's a 2:15 kickoff. Probably because they didn't have floodlights in those days, and that's in order to get the game over before it goes dark. But the real question, of course, here is, how are people going to get there? Friday the 22nd has the answer. The Underground Company announced that the ordinary Sunday service of trains will be run through Christmas Day on the Bakerloo, Central London and District Railways, with special services for football matches. The ordinary Sunday service, which will be subsequently reduced, will be in operation on Hampstead and Highgate and Piccadilly lines until 3 o'clock, and until 10:30 p.m. on the City and South London Railway. Wow. As long as I can remember, the Tube, in fact all railways in this country, have been pretty much closed on both Christmas Day and Boxing Day. I wonder when that changed. I'm going to guess it was in the 1940s, but wow, that really is quite a big change. Talking of changes, this is from Monday the 18th. Brilliant weather favoured the final scenes in Dublin today when the rearguard of the British garrison left the city. Remarkable scenes were witnessed en route. The whole line of quays from the King's Bridge to the North Wall was thronged by crowds of cheering people. As the soldiers marched along, accompanied by their regimental bands, the popular enthusiasm knew no bounds. Tiny Union Jacks were waved in profusion. The windows of all the houses along the route were filled with cheering spectators, and thousands of handkerchiefs fluttered in the sunlight. A year ago such scenes would have been impossible, and nobody but a lunatic would have dreamed of waving a Union Jack in the streets of Dublin. Well, figure that one out. For decades up to 1914, the Irish elected nationalist candidates. In 1918, the Sinn Féin almost swept the board. The Irish War of Independence lasted 2 years. British forces committed any number of atrocities in that time, and now they're being cheered as they leave. Why? I don't know. Because Dublin is not Ireland, perhaps? Or maybe they're beginning to have doubts about this independence thing. I don't know. Anyway, that's all for this week. I aim to have something for next week, but it's Christmas, so who knows?